The first day of the United States naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz is coming to an end. A dramatic report: an Iranian tanker broke through the blockade inside the Strait of Hormuz. Despite the naval blockade imposed by the United States, two tankers, one Iranian and one Chinese, managed to break through it and leave the Strait of Hormuz. And at the same time, a huge crisis in the global energy market. We are watching an unprecedented collapse in oil exports from the Persian Gulf. Will the United States and Iran return to negotiations in Pakistan this week? According to reports, the delegations of Iran and the United States will return to Pakistan later this week for continued talks on ending the war. We will soon bring you all the details. And Iranian audacity has no limits. The Revolutionary Guards in Iran are demanding compensation from 5 Arab states because of the damages of this war. And today, we will bring you the real gap between the United States and Iran in the negotiating talks. What are the conditions of each side? And China is attacking the American blockade in Hormuz and announcing that it harms global interests. And is Hezbollah's disarmament on the table in Lebanon? Israel and Lebanon are entering direct talks today. The direct peace talks between the state of Lebanon and the state of Israel just opened up. I'm Meir Pinto, with me is Mati Shoshani, and we are boots on the ground, and we bring you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel, and also the whole truth about what's happening in our neighborhood, the Middle East. And this is the opening day of the Roaring Lion, or Epic Fury, and the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz has officially begun. It began with an ultimatum that expired. The United States Fifth Fleet began blocking the shipping lanes around Iran. In Tehran, they're threatening retaliation against the region's ports. And yesterday, Donald Trump updated that the Iranian Navy had been almost completely destroyed with 158 ships that are in the seabed destroyed. In a post that he published on Truth Social, the president sent a severe warning to what remains of the Iranian Navy. And his intention is the Revolutionary Guard's Mosquito Fleet, small boats that are causing attacks against the oil carriers. The meaning of the fast boats is if one of them approaches our blockade, it will be eliminated immediately in a fast and brutal way, exactly as we act against drug traffickers, Trump wrote. He noted that the United States will show no tolerance for attempts at provocations at sea, while CENTCOM forces enforce the blockade in the field. The blockade will apply only to ships arriving at or leaving the Iranian ports. Whoever crosses without permission will be seized. This is according to Trump's statements. According to military reports, the American Navy prepared boarding teams for tankers, forces to deal with the threats of the Iranian boats. All this alongside a mine-clearing mission by 2 clearance ships. And in addition to that, the United States military is also preparing for the possibility that the war will be renewed. It's important to note that passage of humanitarian supplies such as food and medicine will be approved and will be subject to security inspection. Let's begin with the question: will the next round of talks with the United States happen this week or next week? Trump left it to himself to announce, but what we do know is that teams from Washington and Tehran are expected to return to Islamabad for continued talks, as we can see. Just days after the negotiating talks reached a dead end because of Iranian grandiosity, it seems that they are returning to the negotiating table. The Iranians confirmed that they are preparing for this scenario. An official source at the Iranian embassy in Pakistan confirmed to Reuters that the next round of negotiations and talks between the United States and Iran may happen this week or at the beginning of next week. A diplomatic source told IRNA news agency, which is identified with the Ayatollah regime in Iran, that the exchange of messages between Iran and Pakistan is continuing. In response to reports about holding another round of talks in Islamabad, the source said that there is still no information about understandings regarding holding talks in the capital of Pakistan or in another format. And meanwhile, Qatari Foreign Minister and spokesman Majid El-Ansari called for an end to the conflict in Iran and said the solution to the Strait of Hormuz must be regional, with the participation of the coastal states that depend on it. The ceasefire between Iran and the United States must continue, and the focus now is on stabilizing it. Delegations of the United States and Iran will discuss the ceasefire later on this week in Pakistan. And a short time before the American decision on a naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz, Iran threatened that opening the strait would be accompanied by collecting taxes from the ships that are passing through it. In the United Arab Emirates, which also has coastlines near the strait, they were alarmed by the threat and argued that this is an action contrary to international maritime law. Right now, the question is being asked, is Iran indeed allowed to collect taxes on the passage of vessels through Hormuz? Today, it was reported that OPEC oil output is falling to a low not seen since the 1980s because of the war in Iran and the drama around the Strait of Hormuz. We will soon expand on the economic consequences of this blockade, and today comes a report that, in its official response to the blockade, Beijing sent a warning to Washington against escalation and emphasized that the blocking of the Strait of Hormuz in this way harms the global economy. China, which imports enormous quantities of oil from the Gulf, demands full freedom of navigation and is setting a red line. Finnish President Alexander Stubb is warning about the broad consequences of the confrontation with Iran and warns that the blocking of the Strait of Hormuz has become a pressure tool with global influence on energy, food, and trade. And is Hezbollah's disarmament on the table? Israel and Lebanon are entering direct talks. Israel will continue the talks while still fighting against Hezbollah terrorists in Lebanon. From Israel's perspective, this is a rare attempt to hold both ends of the rope. And meanwhile, the IDF is completely focused on the war against the Hezbollah terrorist organization. But, and this is a big but, with one eye open towards Iran. After a ceasefire between Iran and the United States, the IDF turned the Lebanese arena into the central one, together with preparation for a possible escalation. And at the same time, Hamas continues to build its strength, refuses to comply with the agreement and to disarm, and it seems that the military round against it is just around the corner. Forces of the IDF's 98th Division completed the encirclement of the Shiite village in Binchbel in southern Lebanon and began the attack. And a complaint was filed at The Hague, the court for war crimes against the Prime Minister of Spain. The organization, Shurat Hadin, filed a complaint with the International Criminal Court in The Hague, ICC, against Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez on charges of war crimes. According to the complaint, Spain assisted the regime in Iran by transferring dual-use components related to explosives worth 1.3 million euros during the years 2024 and 2025. And that's probably also the reason that he continues to support the Revolutionary Guards in Iran and to spread hatred against Israel. We will soon bring you all the details. And Europe's countries are taking time for a lunch break during the war. French President Emmanuel Macron and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer will hold a light conference and a call on Friday on Zoom. Yes, on Zoom. For countries that may be interested in contributing to the multilateral defensive mission to restore freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz, when security conditions allow it, of course. But those announced the French presidency in an official cable that arrived with a horse and a representative. And I'm just kidding now. Well, forget all this last part. I'm Yair Pinto, and with me is Mati Shoshani. And we are boots on the ground. We bring you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel. And this is day 54 of the war against the Revolutionary Guards in Iran, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. And 1 second before we begin, I want to call on you to keep spreading the truth. Share our content with as many people as possible. Click on the subscribe button, and most importantly, do not forget to look for me, Yair Pinto, and for Mati Shoshani on our social media platforms to get our behind-the-scenes look of what's happening in Israel in this war. Our senior Middle East correspondent, Mati Shoshani, how should we understand the first day of the American naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz? Is this a move that is really choking Iran, or are we already seeing its limitations?
That is a great question. Today is the first day after President Trump announced a naval blockade on Iran, as in preventing Iran from receiving goods or exporting goods. And we can already see the results of this ban. We can already see the results of this restriction, one in a slight increase in the price of oil around the world, because Iran continued to export oil throughout this campaign. They were the only ones, of course, who were able to do that from the Gulf. And we're also starting to hear the concern, the fear, the hesitation on behalf of several countries that are worried about the shortages that are going to appear. We haven't really heard from the Iranians yet, at least not directly, and I'll address that in a second, but we're starting to see the ramifications of this. I want to clarify something first. The fact that there's a blockade on this side of Iran, as in the side of Iran that touches the Persian Gulf, that's not a full blockade on the country. Iran is a country that borders with multiple countries on land, plus it has additional sea access in the northern part of the country to the Caspian Sea. Now, this is not, of course, a traditional blue water port, as in it's a closed-off sea that only connects through a very complex system to some of the river channels within Russia, so much smaller scale exports are able to be sent out from them. But still, they're not completely blocked off. They can still have goods come in. They can still smuggle in weapons. The thing they can't do is they can't en masse export oil for cheap, because the only way to do that is to load it up on a ship in Hog Island or one of the other facilities, and then ship it out from there to China, to India, to Pakistan. Well, Pakistan they border with, but anyway, to these other countries where they can really get this to market for a cheap price, as in the transport cost is relatively low, and also the cost of getting it to those people logistically is not very, very high. And that's a key issue here. The whole point of this is to really put pressure on the Iranian regime. Now, I said earlier that we're not directly hearing the response from the Iranian regime. Where might we be seeing the response from them? Earlier today, in Israel and several other locations, we started hearing leaks, primarily from the New York Times, that talk about the fact that the Iranians are coming around on the topic of enriched uranium. And we'll get to this later in the broadcast. But the fact that they're talking about it and presenting a possibly true, let's call it narrative, under which they're saying we already are moving towards understandings, shows that the pressure might be working, that they're stepping back from the very strong attitudes they had on the topic, from their lack of willingness to negotiate, and moving a little more towards the US, because the pressure, or the perceived pressure from this blockade, is starting to carry its weight. That was exactly the goal by the United States here. I want to remind everyone there's one more big issue here. And that big issue is that blocking that area of the world doesn't only block the Iranians, it blocks other countries. Because in the same way that the United States is able to block the export of oil from Iran, they can continue at the very same time to do that to the Gulf states, to the Saudis, to the Emiratis, to the Qataris, to the Kuwaitis, to the Omanis. They can continue blocking their ability to export oil. And because of that, and this is very important, the effect on the global market is not diminished by the fact that there's a blockade on Iran. It's actually created even as more of a significant effect than it was before. And that's the global market. It's part of the global market. And this campaign of pressure on them affects everyone else.
And second question, Mati, what's the real gap right now between the United States and Iran in the talks? And does the fact that the sides are returning to Pakistan indicate progress, or just another round of Iranian stalling?
Yael, that is a great question. And just like most of the answers, sadly, the answer is yes, but. Yes, the pressure is taking an effect on the Iranian regime. Yes, they are coming back to the negotiation table, but we already knew this was going to happen. The very tactic of the Iranian regime is to do exactly this, to draw out the conversation, to pretend to refuse to come to terms and then a week later to come to terms on the same topics that they wouldn't discuss a week before. This is part of their tactic. They are trying to buy time. They're trying to draw out the ceasefire agreement. This is the method of operation that they've always had to exhaust the West, to carry on the conversation endlessly, to pretend that there's internal discourse and internal disagreement within Iran that prevents them from reaching an agreement or fully negotiating a topic, only to discuss it again a few days later. Here's what we really know, and here's the notes that you have to pay attention to in this entire campaign. 2 days ago, or 3 days ago, depending on how you're counting, the Iranians wouldn't talk about the nuclear issue. Today in the morning, so Tuesday morning Israel time, late Monday night US time, there's already leaks around the topic of enriched uranium that are leaked to multiple international outlets, both in English and other languages. And in them, there's a statement that the Iranians are close to an agreement with the United States on the topic of enriched uranium and what will happen on the day after. Now, the United States didn't say this. The Iranians are saying it. What does that show you? That's them signaling to the world, wait, there is a reason for the negotiation. Yes, there is something we can talk about. In reality, my guesstimation has and was and will continue to be that the Iranians will draw out the negotiation till the very last minute and then 2 more minutes after that. Why? Because it plays to their benefit. They have no agenda. They have nothing that's pushing them to end this quickly. As far as they're concerned, if they continue to hold the Strait of Hormuz hostage, if they continue to put financial pressure on the world, if they continue to sort of duke it out with the Americans, it's good for them. It weakens their adversaries. It weakens the other Gulf states. It makes them to be perceived as stronger than they were the day before that. So they have no reason to hurry up. They have no reason to move forward quickly. There's another big issue over here. The Iranians want to draw out this negotiation because their goal here is survival. They're not planning to win the negotiation. They've already lost the war. Their goal here is political survival within Iran. And the longer the time goes by, the better their position actually is. So what's going to happen? Yes, there will be another round of negotiations. Yes, there will be further discussion. Yes, we will go back and forth between the big issues. And at the very last minute, sometime a few hours after the deadline, they will say that we reached an agreement, only to find out a day later that there was no agreement. My hope is that as it was on this weekend, the Trump negotiating team, it was J.D. Vance and Witkoff and Kushner on the weekend. It'll probably be a slightly different mix in the next round of negotiations. They might be looking at this differently. They might have already read up on the playbook of the Iranians and are coming more advised, more savvy as to how to deal with the Iranians. And I hope they continue putting their pressure on them to force them to break the pattern of their negotiations. The fact that the Iranians are already talking publicly of the fact that they're willing to give up their nuclear enrichment plan, that is substantial change compared to what it was just 3 days ago. And I hope we continue to see that same type of pressure continue in the days to come.
And Mati, can the opening of the direct talks between Israel and Lebanon really advance the disarmament of Hezbollah terrorist organization? Or in the meantime, is Israel simply continuing to apply military pressure until Lebanon understands that there is no other way?
Yes, Lebanon is a very, very complicated situation. And I'll try to explain. The headline is Israel is working on negotiations directly with the Lebanese government. The Lebanese government is working hard to detach itself, to disengage from the Hezbollah terrorist organization. The United States government just said just today that Israel's war is not against Lebanon as a country or a people, it's against the Hezbollah terrorist organization that is funded by Iran. All of that is true, but here's a fact that makes this whole story complicated. We've already had an agreement with the Lebanese government. Israel has worked out something last year when the ceasefire was reached with Lebanon. And in that ceasefire agreement, the Lebanese government and the Lebanese armed forces were supposed to start disarming the Hezbollah terrorist organization. Not only that, they received funding, they received manpower, they received international backing to do exactly that. And here lies the issue. They didn't. They didn't try, they were not able to dismantle, to disarm, or to move back Hezbollah in any substantial way. In fact, in the last month, I've heard several rumors talking about the fact that Hezbollah threatened the government of Lebanon, stating that if they dare to try to dismantle Hezbollah, if they dare to try to replace them, they would take action against the leadership of that government. And let me tell you something, that is not an empty threat. Hezbollah, the terrorist organization, has done that before. They've been accused and been guilty in the past several times in assassinating leaders within the Lebanese government, including the prime minister in the past. So when they say they're planning to hurt someone, they mean business in Lebanon. They have absolutely no problem bringing that country down completely if it means that they will gain political power or be able to position themselves to hurt Israel. Now let's get back to the actual negotiation at hand. The key issue here is this. Israel right now is fighting a war inside southern Lebanon, not fighting against the Lebanese. We're fighting against the Hezbollah terrorists. We're fighting in the Shia, in the Muslim villages, in the southern part of the country. Specifically, there's a substantial force that is positioned around Bin Jbal, where I've been in the last year or so, where Hezbollah was deeply embedded in the civilian population. And there are now dozens, possibly more, Hezbollah terrorists that are hiding within the wreckage or what's left of that village. Even today, there were violent clashes between IDF forces and Hezbollah terrorists in that very region. Now, the whole point here is to push Hezbollah as far back as possible. It isn't about taking over territory. We're not trying to conquer Lebanon. We're trying to push Hezbollah back so they can't have line of sight fire on Jewish communities. That means no anti-tank missiles, no mortars, no sniper rifles, nothing like that from Lebanon into Israel. And then a secondary line where they would be pushed back to the place where it would be harder for them to use the short-range rockets against Jewish communities in northern Israel. Let me remind you that when the 7th of October war started, Hezbollah did everything in their power to make it impossible for people in northern Israel to live in their homes. They systematically targeted civilian homes, not military positions, but civilian homes and civilian lives in the northern part of Israel, to the point where Israel had to evacuate over 100,000 people at one point. We're not going to go back there. There's no plan or willingness to allow that to happen again. And what Israel is doing right now is making sure that Hezbollah is weakened to the point where someone can take over and start rebuilding Lebanon in a different way. And the hope is this time around that the Lebanese government is strong enough and that Hezbollah at the same time is weakened enough by Israeli forces to the point where they don't come back all the way to the border with Israel. These next couple of days are going to be very, very important moments in deciding the future of what happens to Lebanon as a country, but specifically to the most powerful, well-funded proxy of the Iranians, the Hezbollah Lebanon terrorist organization, who have received funding to the tune of tens of billions of dollars up till now to fight against Israel. That's right. They're not there to fight the war of the Lebanese people. They've caused wars to Lebanon. They've caused civil war within Lebanon. They are there to fight against Israel, to harm the people of Israel, and nothing more than that. And that needs to change. The Lebanese people need something different. Israel needs to be able to negotiate with the Lebanese government, and that government needs as much power, as much support, as much of a tailwind to make sure that they can weaken and then push back on Hezbollah forces in the country. That'll be better for us in Israel and absolutely better for the people of Lebanon.
So thank you very much, Mati. This really helped me better understand what we're dealing with. And to all of you that are joining us, keep spreading the truth. Share our content with as many people as possible. Click on the subscribe button and look for me, Yair Pinto, and for Mati Shoshani on our social media platforms. The ceasefire has paused recent violence. However, a spiritual battle is still taking place. Today, nearly 99% of Israelis do not know Jesus. Think about that. Nearly 99% of Israelis do not know Jesus, or Yeshua in Hebrew. However, a miracle is unfolding, and One for Israel ministry is sharing the gospel, and Jewish people are knowing and learning about Jesus in numbers not seen since the early church. Many Arabs are also finding faith and unity. One for Israel is an initiative of native-born Israelis, good personal friends of ours, sharing the gospel, discipling believers, and equipping spiritual leaders all across Israel. As Romans 10, verse 1 expresses, my heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is that they all be saved. Your support helps bring the gospel back to Israel. And I want to do something right now. You can pick up the phone and call 800-879-5530. Again, that's 800-879-5530. You can help share the gospel in Israel. You can also visit oneforisrael.org/pray. Or you can also scan the QR code. So oneforisrael.org/pray or scan the QR code. Thank you very much. Now, fighting in Binchbel, again, came at a heavy price this morning. A paratrooper force operating in search and clear activities in one of the neighborhoods in the center of the town ran into a Hezbollah cell at very close range. 10 soldiers were wounded, 3 of them seriously, and in the face-to-face battle, all of the terrorists involved were eliminated. This was not just another local incident in southern Lebanon. It was a clear sign that on day 54 of the Roaring Lion War, or Epic Fury in its American name, the war is moving into a deeper, more dangerous phase with tighter spaces and less distance between the fighting forces and the enemy. So the question now is simple. Are we looking at just another hard day in the campaign, or a moment when all the fronts begin to connect again? Lebanon, Hormuz, Iran, and the stalled negotiations. This is day 54 of the Roaring Lion War, or Epic Fury in its American name, and this day closes with more friction on the ground, more tests of power at sea, and more questions than answers in diplomacy. In the north, the IDF keeps pressing into Binchbel, not as just another village on the map, but as an area where Hezbollah spent years building combat infrastructure, hideouts, firing positions, and infiltration routes. And at the same time, in Washington and Tehran, both sides are still trying to decide whether the talks can return to track, or whether the entire region is heading into another round of military and economic pressure. And to understand this day, we need to begin where everything got stuck. The talks between the United States and Iran in Islamabad ended without a breakthrough. What is becoming clear now is that Washington arrived with what it saw as a final offer, almost a take-it-or-leave-it formula, hoping that military, economic, and regional pressure would force Tehran to bend. But Tehran, once again, chose to buy time, harden its position, and test whether the Americans would come back with another concession. That is what it looked like in the room as well. Handshakes, polite atmosphere, tea, hospitality, and then, very quickly, a rise in tension, accusations, forced pauses, and an ending without a deal. This did not look like a process that is ripe for an agreement. It looked like one side testing the other side, and whether the other side still had patience and no longer believed that the Iranians truly came close to anything. The gaps remain the same gaps. The United States is demanding that highly enriched uranium be removed from Iran, that Tehran commit not only to develop or not to develop nuclear weapons, and that the Strait of Hormuz be genuinely reopened. The Iranians refuse to remove the material from their territory, the uranium. They're willing to talk about maybe diluting it, about a temporary freeze, but not about strategic surrender. According to the reports, another round is still on the table, perhaps later this week, perhaps at the beginning of next week, with both delegations leaving a narrow window open between Friday and Sunday for a return to Islamabad, Pakistan. But right now, that's exactly the picture. The door is not shut, but the hand is already on the latch. Israel understands very well what that means. This is not peace. This is not stability. It is a very fragile pause between one phase of pressure and the next. That is why the IDF is also maintaining a very high level of readiness for the possibility that the Iranian file could heat up again very quickly. The system is preparing in two directions at once. On one side, a scenario in which American pressure pushes Tehran back to the table. On the other side, a scenario in which Iran decides to break the rules and respond to Hormuz through its proxies or through another front. And that's exactly the logic of Day 54. Not the end of a campaign, but a dangerous transition between different forms of warfare. From there, the line runs directly to the sea. The Strait of Hormuz, already for weeks the bottleneck of the world, became in the last day a real test of the capability of the American blockade. Because while Washington speaks about closure, deterrence, and control, the facts from the field show a much more complicated reality. A sanctioned Chinese-linked tanker, reached Stary, passed through the strait, and became the first vessel to leave the Gulf since the blockade began, carrying around 250,000 barrels of methanol and tied to a company already under US sanctions. In addition, another sanctioned tanker also made its way towards the strait, and that tells us something very important. Even when the United States announces a blockade, the reality in the world's most crowded maritime choke point does not become sterile overnight. And the issue here is not only whether the tanker passed or not, if it was one tanker or two tankers. The issue is the message that the market receives. Every such crossing tells shipping companies, cargo owners, insurers, energy traders, and governments in Asia that the situation is still gray, not fully closed, not fully opened, and that's a dangerous condition. Because in that gray zone, mistakes happen. And mistakes like that at sea can turn into confrontation within minutes. One wrong identification, one fast boat getting too close, one mine or one missile fired under pressure, and the whole struggle changes shape. Beijing did not stay quiet. The Chinese sharply condemned the American blockade, warned that it harms the interests of the international community, and again made clear that freedom of navigation in the strait is for them a red line. For China, this is not just another front with Washington. It is energy security, price stability, and the ability to keep feeding its own economy. Even the messages coming out of the Chinese leadership in the last day, including the warning against the return to the law of the jungle and the push for sovereignty, peaceful coexistence, international law, and coordination between security and development. These were not meant to calm things down. They also signaled that China wants to step in as a power unwilling to let the United States alone shape the rules of the game in the Gulf. And at the very same time, Europe is trying to build a different track. French President Emmanuel Macron and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer will hold a video conference on Friday for countries willing to contribute to a multinational defensive mission meant to restore freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz when security conditions allow it. That's an important point. Not an offensive force, not joining the American blockade, but an attempt to build a separate international defensive framework that could move in when the situation allows. In other words, Paris and London are saying we understand the strait must reopen, but we are not necessarily going to run in the exact same way that Washington is running. And that connects us directly to the shock in the energy market, because when Hormuz is squeezed, the result does not stay inside the Gulf. According to the latest figures, OPEC output fell last month by 7.88 million barrels per day to around 20.79 million barrels per day, the sharpest drop since the 1980s. The main damage was recorded in Iraq, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Kuwait. Refined fuel prices jumped. The inflation threat returned. And the world understands that the problem here is not only Iran. The moment that waterway is choked, the entire supply chain begins to shake. Here, it's important to pause for a moment on Iran itself, because in Tehran, they are trying to project resilience. But beneath the surface, the pressure is building. Iran's oil ministry speaks about rebuilding capabilities. The regime speaks about steadfastness and about continuing negotiations only under conditions that respect Iran's rights. But alongside that, we are also seeing an open threat. If Iran does not have security in its own ports, then other ports in the Gulf will not be secure either. That is no longer a hint. That is the language of maritime cohesion. And on the other side, there are also attempts to widen the legal and the diplomatic front. Iran is now demanding compensation from 5 Arab states: Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Jordan, claiming they assisted the American-Israeli effort. That's another sign that Tehran is not only defending itself, it is trying to create regional cost, international pressure, and a narrative in which it presents itself as both victim and aggressor at the same time. But with all the drama around Hormuz, this day is not defined only by sea, because in the north, on the ground, the IDF continues to work very close to the soil. Pinchbel is right now one of the heaviest centers of the campaign. The difficult incident this morning, in which 10 soldiers were wounded in a close-range clash, shows just how far this arena is from being sterile or defeated. This was a face-to-face battle inside the built-up area, where every alley, every wall, every opening, and every hiding place can become a fire zone. A force operating in a search enters a neighborhood, meets a terrorist cell at a very short range, and only then everything explodes at once. This is the kind of fighting that Hezbollah spent years preparing for, and it's also the kind of fighting that Israel is now trying to break, not only with firepower, but with control of the terrain. Binchbel is also a symbol, not just a tactical target, a symbol for Hezbollah, its own town, loaded with memories, an arena burned into regional consciousness since the Second Lebanon War. From Israel, pressure on this arena is meant not only to break infrastructure, but also to hit command points and movement routes, and to make clear to Hezbollah that there are more safe islands. There are no more safe islands in southern Lebanon. They need to move north or get out of there. That's why the combination that we are seeing there is not accidental. Ground forces, air cover, intense firepower, searches, and slow clearing of space packed with weapons, with infrastructure, and with terrorists. This is not a race. It's a deliberate attrition. And against that background, direct talks between Israel and Lebanon are also opening in Washington. It needs to be said honestly, this is an important moment, but not a romantic one. Israel is not speaking with Hezbollah, but with the Lebanese state. Lebanon, for its part, arrives weak, divided, afraid, and without any certainty that it truly has the power to impose anything on Hezbollah. And that's exactly why Hezbollah Secretary General comes out swinging, declaring that negotiations are useless, insisting Hezbollah will not surrender, and saying that the Lebanese army cannot fight its own citizens. This is a predictable response because the very existence of these talks threaten Hezbollah's monopoly over the decision between war and peace. Hezbollah understands very well that if the Lebanese state begins to be seen as an address for an arrangement, then Hezbollah loses not only territory or missiles, but political standings. From Israel's perspective, these talks are an attempt to hold both ends of the rope, to keep applying military pressure in southern Lebanon while also trying to isolate Hezbollah diplomatically. From the American perspective, this is part of the same wider picture. Washington does not want only to manage Iran through Hormuz, it is trying at the same time to stabilize the northern border, the energy market, and the diplomatic space. That's why the American pressure on Israel to reduce the escalation in center areas of Lebanon does not come from softness. It comes from cold calculation. Every major explosion in Beirut or every public failure of the Lebanese talks could echo immediately back into Hormuz, into energy prices, and into the whole effort against Iran. So, I call on all of you to help us spread the truth of what's happening here in Israel, in Lebanon, in Iran. You can do that by subscribing to TBN Israel on YouTube, by liking this content, by sharing it to a friend, and also by leaving a comment saying where you are watching this from. It helps us a lot, a lot. You can also look for Yair Pinto and for Mati Shoshani on our social media platforms to get the behind-the-scene picture of what it's like to live in Israel in this war. And after that moment, we need to return to the facts, because anyone who thinks that the region is now quietly waiting for leaders to decide what's happening, what's the rhythm in this Middle East, here things move even while people are talking, and sometimes, especially while they're talking. The talks with Iran are still alive, but the blockade still stands. Europe is building a future initiative, but the tankers are already testing the limits themselves. Lebanon is flying to Washington for talks, but in Binchbel, the gunfire is still at close range. And while all of that is happening, the big question is who will blink first, Washington, Tehran, or Hezbollah. Inside all of this, there's also the question of time. The Americans are still leaving a window open for further talks with Iran. The Pakistanis continue pushing for mediation, but as the days pass without a breakthrough, the pressure on the ground works against everyone, against Trump, who cannot present full success as long as Hormuz has not returned to normal, against Iran, whose economy is being squeezed harder with every passing day, against Europe, which feels seeing this crisis turn into something broader, and against Lebanon, which is trying to look like a state speaking in its own name, while Hezbollah keeps reminding everyone who still holds the real veto power there. And that also what makes day 54 such a complicated day. There's no single picture here. There are layers. In the top layer, the world talks about shippings, talk prices, about diplomatic initiatives. In the layer underneath, you have fleets that are moving, tankers that are testing the routes, ground forces are entering towns, and regimes that are measuring one another with a pain threshold. And in the deepest layer, every side is trying to prove that it has not been broken. Iran still says that it still controls Hormuz and still holds its terms. The United States of America says that the ball is in Tehran's court. Israel makes clear that in the north, it's not waiting for anyone else to solve its problems. Hezbollah is trying to convince everybody that it remains the only real address in Lebanon. That's why this story does not stop with one article about one tanker. And it does not end with the question of whether there will be another meeting in Pakistan. This is a struggle over regional order. Who sets the rules of navigation? Who sets the price of an arrangement? Who determines whether Lebanon is a state or a patronage arena? And who decides whether Iran is now paying a strategic price or merely buying itself more time? There's one more thing that needs to be said about this day. Sometimes, a small detail explains the big picture better than anything else. Not a headline about a precedent, but a paratrooper force that is inside a neighborhood. Not a speech about global stability, but one tanker testing whether anyone will really stop it. Not a declaration about peace, but Hezbollah's Secretary General rushing to make clear that he will not accept it. That is how the Middle East works. It does not change only through major decisions. It changes when someone identifies an opening, tests the boundaries, and pushes just a little further. That's also where the broader meaning of Day 54 comes in, because this has long stopped being only a war for missiles and for targets. It is now also a war over the tempo, over the ability to force the tempo on the other side. Will Iran manage to buy time until the world pressures Washington to ease off? Will the United States manage to create a reality in which every day without an agreement becomes more painful for Tehran? Will Israel manage to turn the pressure in southern Lebanon into a fact that cannot be erased inside negotiation rooms? And will Europe manage to remain a player and not only a spectator? And in the meantime, inside all these calculations, there is still a simple fact. Our soldiers are still there in southern Lebanon, in ground operations, in direct contacts, in searches, in clashes. This war is not an idea. It's not only a negotiation that succeeded or failed. It is the soldier entering a house, the terrorist waiting at close range, and the helicopter evacuating wounded men to the Rambam hospital or other hospitals in Israel. That's why anyone speaking about an arrangement must remember where things are finally measured, not by the wording of a joint statement, but by what happens on the ground. Day 54 closes with the United States pressing at sea, Iran buying time, Europe trying to build an alternative, and Israel deepening the campaign in the north. And if all these lines now meet at one point, what happens the moment someone decides it is time to stop talking and start breaking things again? And to all of you, I'm calling you to keep spreading the truth. Follow us. Most importantly, do not forget to hit the subscribe button so you never miss another update of Boots on the Ground. I'm Yair Pinto, that was Mati Shoshani. You can follow us on our social media platform to get the behind-the-scene look of this war, and above all, make sure that you always pray for wisdom to our leaders, pray for the IDF soldiers, pray for the children of Israel, and keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem, because that's what it's all about. It's a spiritual war. We need your help in prayer, in support. We need you to stand with us, and we appreciate every email you sent us, every like, every comment. We do this for you. Thank you, and keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.